scientists don't know what really causes this phenomenon. So this has been going on for a very long time, but every time it happens, the scientists come up with a new fresh explanation for it.
Welcome to Don't Turn Around, a podcast about the paranormal and the unexplained and the often profound impact these events can have on our lives. This is a space for amazing stories and extraordinary experiences as told by our amazing community. If you like what you hear, and I really hope that you do, one way you can really help this show get to more ears is to leave a glowing review on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify. I hear you can drop stars over there as well. And of course, you can always support the show on Patreon. So all those links will be out in the show notes on Don't Turn Around Podcast Info on Instagram. So tonight's guests, I'm excited to have back on the show together. For the first time on Don't Turn Around. Together, forces join. We have Karly, the Village Tarot Witch on Instagram, and of course, Mallory, Coffee, Books, and Ghosts on the social medias. Welcome back to Don't Turn Around.
Hi.
Thank you.
So I was inspired to have you guys on the show. We've been chatting for a little while, and you have some exciting things going on, and something in particular that caught my attention, and that's sort of been on my mind lately, is the tenet of this show is the intersection, right, of the paranormal and our human experience, this journey that defines us as, you know, who we are, which is of course dynamic and changes from moment to moment. And I was thinking in particular in terms of how the paranormal relates either directly or indirectly to our experience as creative individuals. And of course, I got wind of the two of you coming together to put together a dark horror anthology. And I said, oh, great. I would love to talk about writing. I would love to talk about paranormal, and I would love to talk about horror. So here we are. Well, I've got to ask the first question, well, not really a question, but let's start off by telling the listeners a little bit about this anthology project.
All right. Well, how did this happen, Mallory? I feel like we talk about writing all the time, but
We do. So
fever dream.
Karly and I have become super close through Instagram, and so when I had my book published in January, Karly was knee-deep in the book that she was writing, which was fiction.
Yes.
And when I finished my book, I would complain to Karly because I missed writing. And she'd be like, try fiction. And I was like, no.
Do it. I shamelessly bullied her into writing fiction. She was like, I don't know. And I was like, I'm telling you.
That's what friends are
I was
for.
like, okay. And then I figured out a way to kind of work some of my personal experience, like rework it into a short story, which then kind of blew up into a full novel. But I was like, oh my God, writing fiction is so freeing. And then just between talking to Karly and just kind of getting more into the writing side of things, she and I started sharing we were finding all these open submission calls for different anthologies. And I had been in 2 volumes of The Feminine Macabre, which is for nonfiction with Amanda Woomer. And I love that. I love the community it brought me, and I love the opportunity to get published. Yeah. It was so awesome.
Yeah.
And I think Karly one day was like, what if we do this ourselves? And I was like,
What if?
Oh my God.
Yeah.
And so that was the spark.
It was. And I feel like we are both the type of people that were like, this is a great idea. We're going to do it. And then we jump 10 steps ahead and we're like, we're doing it. We're doing it. This is going to be great.
Yeah. Because I think we both are the kinds of people we can feel when something is the right path. Like we go with something speaks to us and we're like, you know what? Like we're such good friends and we are doing this thing. And we have other projects going on and we're doing other things. But this just feels like the next right step for both of us. Something to kind of bulk up what we do and network a little more, meet kind of more writers and
Yeah.
involve more people. I love that.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. I love that. So the anthology itself, what's the theme? What are you hoping to see from submissions?
Horror.
Okay.
I mean, that's obviously it's in the description, but for me as a writer, I use fiction writing to dive into parts of my life that I'm uncomfortable saying, this happened to me. So I take fiction and I take parts of what happened to me and turn it into the story that's completely different from anything that I've ever faced. And the thing that I enjoy about horror is those stories that really makes you sit and think about it and be like, oh, that was gory and terrible, but I kind of hard relate to it.
Yes. Oh gosh, yeah. I mean, I love that way of that lens, right? I think there is a certain aspect of, depending on who you're reading, but a certain aspect of hope in horror is the, wading through the muck and the viscera and the innards, just to, you keep going until you survive. The final girl or final guy or whatever, but against all odds, making it through a really horrific situation. And frankly, that's life. I mean, there are those horrific situations that many of us, if we haven't come across already, will probably have at least one situation to deal with in life. And that's, for me, one of the things I really get out of horror, right? And then, of course, I'm a weirdo too. It's just mesmerizing and just the one to be scared, but also this grotesque imagery that's terrifying and at the same time beautiful. Also, is just an experience in and of itself.
And I will say, just to piggyback off of that, from the writer's side, because I honestly didn't read a ton of horror. I've had to kind of teach myself real quick because you don't want to be too cliche, and you want to know what's out there before you start writing it. I mean, but from the writing side, it's nice to not have to give them a happy ending. It's kind of freeing to be like, this is what happened. In reality, this might not have such a happy ending, and it's okay, or to be vague. Especially what Karly and I talk about. We're like literally just talking about it. The short story format is very freeing because you can kind of pull a Ray Bradbury and not give the whole picture. So then the reader becomes part of the story and how they interpret it. Like,
that's
huge. So cool.
Yeah. Actually, a few years ago, I got very into writing flash fiction. And on my Patreon, I would release a new flash piece in audio. I think it was at one point was up to every other week. And I done that for about 3 years. And it's the same concept where you really give yourself this constraint in word count. One really makes you become a very nimble sort of a writer, but then you're giving the reader an opportunity to carry that story forward should they choose to do so. I'm interested in going back through some of these pieces that I've written over the years, because I guarantee, to touch on what Karly has said, my life experience, one way or another, does feed into the narrative, be it just the emotion and sometimes it catches me off guard, and I only realize what's happening when I'm into it. And it's definitely a wild experience. That is for sure.
This is something that has stuck with me, but Stephen King wrote a book on writing, and it's one that I have on audio.
I love it. Where is it? I've got it on one of my bookshelves down here.
It's fantastic. And one of the things that he said is that to write what you know. And then he gave a few examples of some of the characters that he's written and the aspects of his real life. And that to me was kind of a game changer, because I'm not comfortable talking about what's happened in my real life, because what's happened in my real life involves other people, and I don't want to tell their stories. I'm not looking to go out there and be like, But what I am interested in doing is explaining the psychology behind the way that I feel and the way that other people could feel. And horror is an amazing lens to to do that because it opens you up to more of the human experience. And I know that sounds weird because the point of horror is to be scared. But if you're looking at like a rom-com, it's supposed to be 99.9% lighthearted. There's one scene where he might not get the girl, but then it's happily ever after. And
right, the formula. And I'll be honest, that is often more difficult for me to watch than horror.
You're so right. Like being able to like, when something happens, and Karly, you and I have said like, my characters suddenly did this, like it's like they've got a life of their own because you kind of are like, well, how would they feel about this and what would they think? And it's almost creepy when you're writing and they are their own thing and it's no longer how you would react to what's happening. It's all these different ways that these different little characters that you've made are reacting to things. And you're like, man, there's so many ways this could go depending on the people involved in it.
Yeah. And it's fascinating to wonder, where is this going on? Where these characters really are following these sort of independent paths where it's an aspect of self, certainly. But in those moments where you are in the groove and it is totally unconscious, I don't understand. I don't know if I want to understand, but it's like magic. It really, much like the paranormal can be, it is like magic. Right. And I wonder, is tapping into that deep kind of inspiration, is there something almost extra sensory going on there? Because when I'm really in that zone, I am almost entirely transported. And so I'm wondering, have your experiences sort of been similar where it's almost like you almost get into this trance-like state where it almost feels like some of these things are coming from outside of you?
Yes.
Yeah, I think we both have. Yeah, there's been a few times where one scene in particular, I was like, well, that took a left turn. And I think she knows the exact scene I'm talking about.
And she was like, who is writing this? What's the writer here?
Me. I'm writing this. But yeah, there have definitely been times when I got so in the zone that, it's almost like you're making your own tulpa or something like that, where like your characters really do take on a life of their own. So like the main character in my novel is, I gave her my PTSD, but I gave her this entire different backstory. So like nothing that happened to her is anything that happened to me. It's just, we share the same symptoms. Sorry, kids are loud.
That's fine. I get it.
Well, it turned into a thing where it, like Mallory was saying, it stopped being how I would react to something and started being how she would react to something. And like, it's almost like she's a friend in a weird way where like I could sit and think and be like, how would she react to this? And I could give you the answer because I created her. Yeah.
And it might not be how you react to it. It might, it's a whole different thing. And it makes you also, at least it makes me in those moments, or maybe after those moments when I'm sitting back and I'm having a nice cold beer to reward myself for words captured for that day. And it brings in that whole question of reality and perception of reality and these alternate realities that we create in our minds. It's reality, right? Where does that boundary, when it becomes that fuzzy, what is the boundary? Does it mean that this world that I'm creating that feels so real while I'm sitting there in a chair is any less real than when I get up and I go upstairs and I crack open that beer? I don't know, because there's moments where it feels very gripping and very real.
Well, and Phil, when I was on last time, we were talking about how, like, after a paranormal investigation, that you're looking for that gut feeling and you're following that. And then you get home and it's like, sometimes you don't turn it off. And I know Karly, like, I know that you have that constantly, but like for us, we talked about like, well, how do you turn that off? And like, again, for me as a mom, like I only have a certain amount of time that I can sit and really focus and do this. But it's like in the back of my mind, sometimes I'll sit down for a next like session when I have some time, and it'll just pour out of me because I've been thinking about it. I've been continuing the story like back here while I'm like playing Candyland over here.
Yeah, it's a strange sort of multitasking, which apparently multitasking is a myth, apparently. But I think as far as if it's if it's all taking place up here, I mean, I know my brain is doing a million things at once. So, yeah.
Pay attention.
What I'm saying. But at the same time, too, it's almost, again, like when you're coming off an investigation, like a really great investigation, whether or not anything has happened, it's just where you're in that zone, you're in that pace, and then you come back to, again, I say it's coming back to reality, and reality feels very strange when you come back into it, right?
Yeah. No, I feel like we've all had those moments, whether it's ghost hunting or through writing, where, you snap back and you're like, oh, weird, I'm in my bedroom.
I have, just real quick, I have this event coming up, and I'm going to be with a bunch of normies. And I'm super excited, but I'm also like, oh man, like I'm so used to spending so much time talking to people who just kind of believe along the same lines that I do. And I'm like, oh my God, like, like that's going to be interesting.
It is. Yeah. I feel like once you get used to talking to creatives or other weirdos or a blend of the two, it's really hard to go back to civilized society.
Yeah, I'm gonna need to like get some swagger going. That and they're like,
yep. No, I have that same problem where I'm like, oh, I have to masquerade as a normal person today. How odd.
right.
As I'm sitting here thinking, I don't often leave the house. I mean, I'm not like a weird hermit, but since the pandemic, my social structure in life has really sort of changed. And when I am going out and being social, typically it is with the other weirdos who I love so much.
Met. Phil and I just met like a month ago.
We did. After you had to chase me around Penhurst, but you got me.
Like, where's Waldo? I literally was at Penhurst, and I was like texting him, and there's like no service on the Penhurst campus, and he was like at the front of the lectures all day, and then I would see him like go by like the far courtyard, and we like would run after him, and he wasn't there
And vanish.
It happened like 3 times. I'm like, Phil, forget. But then we saw each other.
I'm going to dinner, but then the next day we actually met. Was not long enough, and I think it's like something like a Paracon. It's hard to get that quality time with people, so we all have to convene to do an investigation, and then we can do like a writer's workshop. So investigation and a writer's workshop. It'll be like a paranormal writer's retreat.
Ooh, I'm having so much fun. I'm having so much fun finding the places where the paranormal and writers intersect. And I'm meeting more writers now, but in the past, I've been so quiet about my writing that it's like I wasn't really in that world. So now I'm in like, I feel like I have a foot in, so I've got like a foot in the tarot world, a foot in the paranormal world, and now a foot in the writing world. Yep. And I'm trying to learn how to blend it all. But the more into it that I get, the more I realize that a lot of the paranormal people are just inherently creative and open-minded. And they get that push to be like, hey, I want you to tell me a story. It can be a
story. Yeah.
And those stories, I want to hear what you have to say, because I feel like we probably shouldn't talk about the ones that we've had, but there was one in particular that I did not see coming. It's the Stitches. Mallory will know what I'm talking about. And it was this story that got submitted that like I never would have thought of, but when we read it, I was like, this is fantastic. This is so good. And we've gotten some really great submissions that have like, I will literally think about it after the fact and be like, huh, that was awesome. But because we're doing this, we are opening the door to these new relationships. And that's kind of what we wanted. We know that this isn't going to be something that's going to be like, this isn't going to be a moneymaker for any of us, but that's not the point. The point is for us all to connect and to bond over these stories that are based off of our imagination. But like, I have no idea what was going on in their minds when they wrote it. And I love to think about that.
Yes. Yeah. And I got to say too, just the concept of telling stories and telling spooky stories is, for me, going way back my interest in the paranormal and storytelling have always really been intertwined, because I was the kid in the group of friends that would love to be at sleepovers, and I would be the one coming up with these scary stories to scare the crap out of my friends. And that pretty much continued, through high school. I was still, we'd go camping. I would be the one telling the scary stories. And that's got me into writing and getting my writing out there, and then got me into podcasting, which then got me into just podcasting about the paranormal, and then which got me into paranormal investigation.
Yep.
So it started with this creative seed of just wanting to tell these stories about the spooky shit that I thought was cool. And then all of a sudden, I am, in an asylum in the dark with a blindfold on, hearing voices say crazy shit to me that people that I might not have believed even 10 years ago.
You know what's funny is my story is exactly inverted. I started hearing crazy shit like at an old haunted fort. And then I was on podcasts as like a guest, and I was on internet shows and whatever. And then, through meeting people through the paranormal, then I got into spooky writing. So like we came at it like completely opposite.
So let me ask you this.
In the night.
As you are approaching your writing, and you're writing, a spooky paragraph where strange things are happening, and there might not be a distinction. So, because I kind of look at my writing and the paranormal aspect to my stories, sort of a, act one, before investigation, act two, like after my eyes have been open to all these experiences, and how I approach the paranormal aspect in a particular short story is quite a bit different now that I have that real data. And I think there's times where I really find myself challenged if I'm doing something that has, some ancient evil. I have to really kind of tease out the right details, especially since really not everything out there is evil, or out to get us. And I find it's, I don't want to say in the past I used a lot of gimmicks or whatnot, but I really kind of try to get to the heart of what makes this scary and what would scare me. And I find that what would scare me now is a little bit different than what would scare me 3 or 4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah, I just demanded some time for myself today, and I wrote a bunch, and I came up with something that's like I want to expand, but I don't, because I'm so excited about what I came up with for the book that I'm writing. Like I took it a different direction that I think even I didn't. When I started, I sat down and I wrote this thing. I was like, okay, this is going to be our villain character, and this is what they do. And it was kind of like a generalized spooky stuff. And I'm like, you know what? Like, it's like I want to say so much, but it's like I can't. But suffice to say, a lot of things happen that I think any of this kind of villain could just happen, and it would be scary. And I'm looking back now, and I'm like, you know what? What if I tweak this a little bit? So then at the end, it's painting a picture that's more intact and has more meaning, and it ties in, more than one, instead of just like scary.
Like, boo, right? Yeah.
Scary book.
Yeah. Which has its place as well. I think it's this beautiful kind of balancing act of that, that visceral, like lizard brain reactive scare versus the, planting that stinger in that kind of starts to fester and becomes more of this full body kind of response that just grows over time and drives you a little crazy.
Yeah. I think the things that used to scare me probably don't scare me anymore. Like, I watch a lot of horror. I spend a lot of time watching horror movies. I read a lot of psychological thrillers. I'm very much in that world, but the things that actually scare me aren't necessarily those things. And it's not from desensitization, because like, I still like, I watch it. It's still like, ooh, I hated that. But But the things that get the gut reaction from me are very different. So if I had the confidence to write a book 10 years ago, it probably wouldn't have been anything like the book that I just finished, because my writing reflects what does scare me now and the elements and things like that in my writing. So probably 10 years from now, in contrast, I will write something completely different, and I'll probably always still write scary things, because actually Mallory knows this too, because I added some happier scenes to like break the tension a little bit, to give you a breather. And I was like, ew, I'm making it romantic. Yeah, I did. I wrote some great scenes, but there was definitely times when I was like, bleh, I don't. I think that's just where I'm comfortable. But yeah, I think that's an interesting part of the conversation, that as you change, the things that you will find scary will change. And
you know what?
Books will change.
That is like literally sitting here
and
just now.
The
section that I wrote today, I'm like, why did I love that so much? And I now, like, having this conversation, I'm like, you know what? I loved it so much, and it hit me so good, because what is scary, I can share this, but what is scary in that scene is that my characters, like one of her only friends, is in danger. Yep. And like I talk about all the time, like how important my friendships are to me. Like when you get older, you know, you have less, but they're so important to you. Mm-hmm. And I think in that moment, I feel like but it's funny because at the time I was writing it, I'm like, oh, we have to put our friend in danger and that'll spur action. But as I was writing it, I'm like, oh man, like I'm getting like emotional. And Karly, like we've laughed before. You're like, I'm crying in my own writing.
Yep, I did that before.
Yeah. Like, I didn't cry today. Like, I didn't cry, but I was like, man, this is like that would suck. Like what I just wrote, like I'm so glad that is not happening to me.
Yeah, no. And for me, a recent experience, just yesterday, I was writing a passage for the follow-up for one of my books, and I'm going to have to be as vague as possible, but it's the concept of someone, discovering, we'll say, somebody. And in my head, it initially, like for an instant, it was very like tropey, but then that trope was like pushed out by something that was way disturbing. And the thing that made it so scary was just not what this guy saw, but then trying to, rationalize how could a human being do this? And like it left me very chilled. And I said, you know what? That's enough writing for today. I'm going to end right there, and I'm going to go put on a rom-com.
Yeah, you were like, that's you somewhere back in your brain. Like, I can't watch that movie Hostel. I can't ever.
That movie freaks me out. I watched that.
I haven't seen that. Yeah, I haven't watched that one.
It's that kind of horror. Like I can read horror, but I don't know. Like I saw that in college, and that it's the same. It's like, how can anyone this way toward another human? I mean, I think most paranormal investigators believe like that we're more scared of other humans than we are of ghosts most of the time, right? Like,
Truth.
Yeah,
and like
that's too.
Yeah. Although I will tell you, this passage was more of a how could a human do this to themselves? What would cause them?
There's that too.
To do
that's
that.
That's an interesting point too. Yeah.
So Phil, are you submitting this to the anthology? Because
so this is a novel. That's a novel, but I have 3 like front runner ideas, and this week I'm committing to one of them, and that will be the one that I submit, unless I hate it, and then I'll submit something else.
I totally understand that. I don't know if you guys have this problem too, but I have a hard time going from novel to short story. Like if I'm writing short stories, I can pump them out one after another. Once I get into novel mode, it is so hard for me to switch back and forth, which was really unexpected because I had this entire list of anthologies that I was planning on submitting to, because like Mallory said, we've seen so many of them, and we're like, we love we love this idea of bringing different voices together and publishing them all together. But I have really been struggling. I haven't even written my story for
Yeah, no, it's a real
Yours
challenge.
is Karly's. It will be a little different. Like so there are a lot of anthologies out there. There's a ton you can submit to. Different things offer different. Some are money makers. Some are you have to be established. Some are a certain amount of words. Ours, we're doing. Like Karly said, it's not going to be a moneymaker, but there's some things that we're doing with the anthology and with our contributors that a lot of other anthologies aren't going to do. And without giving too much away, Karly can't really write her story until
we've picked everybody else's.
Until we pick everyone else's, which is pretty cool. It's going to be cool.
All right, I'm intrigued.
It's going to be different from me. You said earlier, Phil, that you started with flash fiction, and that actually is how I started too. It was just like, here's this picture, or here are these tarot cards. Let's write a story about it. And it really was, if it could fit in an Instagram caption, that's what I would write. That was it, including the hashtags, and then they got longer and longer. But so I'm excited for a new challenge.
Hey, yeah, challenges are great. Anything that kind of pushes you as a writer. I think for me, because I did not start with flash fiction, I actually started with novel length.
With you, okay.
And I mean, I wrote some short stories in high school, but pretty much everything was novel length. And so the flash fiction was a real challenge because I really wanted to fine tune my short story writing because I was, again, too kind of expansive and putting those constraints on me, again, really tighten things up in a neat kind of way. Now, here's a question that I had rolling around in my brain as we were talking about films and books that we've read. My experience as a consumer of horror media, be it books or films, I find that like a good scary movie gets way more of a fear reaction out of me versus being on an investigation. And even when you have those moments those moments of fear they're very different, because I still have those moments where you are just sensing something very negative and you just get that, the Peter tingle is what we call it, thanks to Marvel. But when I'm watching a scary movie, it's a whole different experience. It is a whole different experience.
You mean Peter Parker?
Yes, like Peter Parker.
Mallory and I both had the same reaction just now.
That's not what I thought.
Peter Parker.
Peter Parker. Your spidey senses are going off.
Yes. It's nothing to do with the ropes and gym class. So your experiences, I want to know, when you are, say, watching a scary movie, the fear that you feel, compare it to what you experience in those moments when you're on investigation. Because I'll say in general, I'm often not feeling fearful on an investigation. If I have a moment of fear, it's literally that, maybe a moment or maybe several minutes, but it's way different experience for me sitting on the couch and watching a good scary movie. And I wonder too, and I'm going to ask you this other question, are we letting our guard down in a different way when we're watching a scary movie, being more, turning off these safety valves so we can just experience the thrills?
Like let it in.
Yeah.
I like that. So, yeah, I think, yes, I experience fear in different ways when I'm watching a scary movie versus when I'm on an investigation. Because I enjoy the fear that scary movies give me, because it's like a release. I have a lot of anxiety as a person, and watching a horror movie literally is a controlled way to feel fear, release it, and move the fuck on with your life.
Yeah,
like, that was scary. It's appropriate to be scared in that moment, right? So there is a lot of psychology that says people with anxiety disorders will gravitate towards this genre because it gives them a reason to feel afraid, and then the fear ends because the monster is dead, the movie is resolved, it's over, right? But on an investigation, most of the time, if you find me on an investigation, I am like bubbly and like bouncy and excited. Oh, yeah. There are a few times that I have been genuinely afraid on investigations. Few and far between, but it is a different reaction. You see a different side of me on both of them. And I think for me, the fear comes from knowing that they used to be human. Not that they could hurt me now, because I don't necessarily believe that. You know, I guess it depends on the situation, but for the most part, I don't believe that a ghost could hurt me, right? So when I'm there, the feel that I fear is almost like an echo of knowing that someone was human. So if that scary ghost was a human in front of me, I would be scared shitless. And so as a result, sorry, dog. As a result, I'm like sitting there and, you know, I have come across some very angry, violent spirits and I'm like, well, fuck you, you know, or, you know, whatever nonsense I spout in the moment. But I think when I do feel afraid, it's because I know I recognize the humanity in that moment versus in a movie. I'm like, that's a man in a mask.
Right.
You know, it's scary and it's fun, but it's not like I'm not going to face my maker because of it.
Right.
Yeah. I've never been like afraid for my life on an investigation, even when I've been scared. I'm trying to think, like some of the scariest times that I had, like we were, in April, I think we did a big group thing at the Grand Midway Hotel. Mm-hmm. That place is freaky. Not every room, but I was going to sleep in the Harry Potter room because I love it. And I was the only one on that floor. Everyone else was kind of outside. We were still kind of getting started, and I heard footsteps approach in the hallway, and I was totally by myself. And I remember being like, it's kind of like, so I just got back from Universal Studios. And I love roller coasters. And like, you know, when you get right to the top and you know this is going to send your brain down into your shoes. Like you're about to get your shit rocked. Yes. But I always giggle when I'm on a roller coaster. I laugh my ass off. I'm like laughing and I'm terrified, but I'm like laughing. And it was kind of being at the Grand Midway and that happening when I heard the footsteps and I was completely alone was the first time that I enjoyed like the fear on an investigation. I made Hillary sleep with me that night because I was like, this place is freaky. We were all going to sleep separately and like try and be bold. So I was still like afraid, but I remember thinking like, I got my camera out. I'm like, don't freak out. You know, normally I would run and like, I don't like to be alone on an investigation, you know, like there's just safety in numbers. You can have too many, but like, I remember distinctly being like, okay, we're okay now. This is fine. You know, and normally, so I would think that like something in me is starting to like enjoy that fear the same way that I enjoy the fear on a roller coaster. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, I don't really watch horror movies. I'll watch like Freddy Krueger and laugh my ass off because it's so silly, but I can't do I can't do the stuff that Karly watches. Like I can't do it. But I will read horror. And it's the same kind of thing because I am alone. It is me. I'm the only one, even in a room of people. I am alone. It's me and my pages. And no one else in the room is experiencing what I'm experiencing. And like there's something like so creepy about that.
It's so intimate. It's very
yes. And it's like it's your brain. You're kind of coming up with the images and you kind of have an idea of like I was just like, I read, you know, Stephen King, but Grady Hendrix, like he really like that really connected with me.
Oh, like, I don't know. I don't think I know Grady Hendrix.
He wrote My Best Friend's Exorcism and How to Sell a Haunted House, but he does it in such a way where he, like we were talking about earlier, he'll explore all the different characters and all their reactions to what's going on. And it's like, he does it in such like a way that you're just like, oh my God, and you're like, all this crazy shit's happening. He does such a good job. He really that meant a lot for me to start reading his stuff.
All right. I will put that.
Also, he wrote a Final Girls Support Club.
Yes. Yep.
And I love that one. I've read all of those books too. Incredible books, but I especially liked that one because it is it was exploring their dynamic after the fact, and like the way that their lives were changed from experiencing these things. But
ooh, sounds like inspiration for you.
Sounds like inspiration. I know. I wish I'd read it before I had written my book, because I was like, I could play up more on these. But anyways, yeah.
Next book.
Next book, yeah. I'm working on book 2 now. So
oh, I love it.
Yes.
I have a fun side story.
Ooh,
so
okay.
it just popped into my brain. So my short story for the anthology was splintered off the book that I'm writing. And then when I went back to my book, I had to completely redo everything because there were things that I fell in love with in my short story. It was a whole thing.
Anyway. I remember that. It was a whole thing.
Damn it! I liked my book, and then I did this, but it's like I love my manuscript. It's going awesome. However, I had to name my character, right? Got to name her. So I'm like, oh, you know what? Like, because in the short story, maybe things don't go so well for her. I'm not going to give that away too much. But I was like, I need a name that means like doomed. I go to Google, names that mean doomed. Do you know what name came up? Mallory.
No. Wow.
Yeah, I did it again. I'm like, oh, names that mean unfortunate. Mallory. And I'm like, oh my God. Because my name is Mal,
that's interesting.
Bad in French.
Yeah.
And so like Mallory, malignant, what else? Malign, so.
Oh, that's wild.
No.
So I was like, I am not naming her Mallory, even though it's perfect.
Even though it's perfect and it's a beautiful name. Oh, I like that.
No.
So
That is so funny.
Fun fact.
I hate naming characters. This is my toxic trait as a writer. When I write short stories, I will go above and beyond to avoid giving a character a name. Like I will constantly work because I usually write from first person perspective instead of like here's the general. I'm telling you a story from how this character feels in this moment, and that's how I write. And like when I write like that, it's easy to just be like to describe the person and the way that they make you feel and never name them. Literally the hardest part about writing the entire fucking novel was naming my characters. And I was like,
I accidentally name people as I go. They just like flow out of me. And then I'll look back and be like, oh, that's my brother's sister-in-law and her husband. And I didn't even realize.
Well, what's funny is, I'm rewriting the first novel I ever published because I've hopefully grown as a writer since I wrote it more than God knows how long ago. But one of the things I did as far as naming, there were so many like 2-syllable names starting with the letter M, and I'm still struggling to figure out how that slipped past me at the time because I recorded the whole thing as a podcast. So I was saying these names out loud, every day, and I had a professional editor and they didn't say anything. And it was only until several years later where I'm like, what was I thinking? That is ridiculous. So it's just, I feel you. Bottom line, I feel you on the naming.
The naming thing.
So it's late at night, or maybe it's during the day, because it doesn't matter. And you're sitting there and you're writing something particularly creepy. You're really tapping into it, right? You're really tapping into that spooky sort of other reality, ethereal space. Do you ever find when you really get into that zone that some weird things tend to happen in that same time frame or maybe shortly thereafter? Have you ever experienced that?
That has happened to me before.
Me too.
All right. All right.
Like,
I want a story then.
Well, so as all right, I feel like all three of us are like, well, I can't really give details because it's in my book. But there was, so I can say that my book has a serial killer in it. And he's just a fucking creep, obviously. I feel like that doesn't need to be said, but he's very scary. He has a very peculiar way of speaking. And I was like in the zone much later at night than I normally am because I wake up early as fuck. So my best creative hours are in the daytime, and in the night, I'm just like a little exhausted owl, just like in my bed with my blankets. But
get that.
this night I was up. It probably was like 1 or 2 in the morning where I was fucking going. I was typing. And I wrote this one scene. It was a scene where it was a confrontation scene. And I was like, fuck yes. Insane. And I ended. And afterwards I was like, oh, I'm a little bit freaked out right now. And then I tried to lay down and go to sleep. And I kept hearing these sounds and like, literally phrases that I had written in my book were flowing into my mind, and I was like imagining them, and I was like, okay, that's enough for today.
We're done. Yeah. We're done.
We're done here.
Mallory.
Yeah. Well, mine was just during the day. So I have an office, like my office / library / mommy's sanity room is down a short hallway, like right off my bedroom. And I wrote Making Friends with Ghosts there. I sat in that seat, and like same thing. It was the same thing when I'm writing the book that I'm writing now is when I was writing Making Friends with Ghosts, and I would recount some of the scarier events. Like I'm talking about the Shanley Hotel or some weird things. And I would hear like a dog or my kids come down that short hallway, and I would turn and, asking for a snack or like my dog wanting pets, and there's no one there. It kept happening and happening. And like, it still happens. I don't know what it is. I'm like, wondering if it's like the air conditioning kicking on or something, but like, that tangible feeling.
Right.
And I've considered and this is, I'm going to go down like a little rabbit hole here, but like I have considered that because I am finally, like, getting that book published in January was huge for me. That was like my childhood dream, like realized. And sometimes I wonder if it's a little support crowd coming down to like check on me. It doesn't feel bad.
Yeah.
Sometimes I just get that like a supportive feeling. It's never felt negative. It's like I said, it feels like my dog or my kids.
Yeah.
So while I'm writing creepy stuff, sometimes for me, I'm wondering if it's just that I'm writing and not necessarily something creepy. And maybe because I am who I am, I'm just more tapped into that.
Yeah, which it could be. And, I've had similar experiences, from sounds to the door to my studio just inexplicably creeping open when there's really poor airflow kind of down here in general. Oh, and it's sometimes when have been in that zone, or if I've been reviewing evidence all night, I tend to notice more strange things. Yeah. And I think it's got to be a combination of you're keyed up and you're open and your things know you're open. I don't know. But it's something I've been noticing more with the writing and kind of thinking about more and wondering if it's just yet another way to kind of open ourselves up to this wider experience. Now that I'm so aware of what this wider experience is, I find I'm paying more attention and seeing how flexing those creative neurons. Yeah.
I wonder if like Karly and I like sending out a call for people to send us their stuff would affect any kind of, situation, scenario like that. Like Karly are calling out to the void. Like
you are.
Send us your fear. Yeah. Like, what are we doing?
Send us your ghost.
Yeah. Well, it really is interesting because it does open you up in a new way because you're opening yourself up to a new experience. And I feel like all three of us are ghost hunters. We've all been on investigations. We've all known that at some point you do have to say, I want to experience this. And there's like a level where you open up. And I feel like while this is fiction, it does involve a level of opening up and saying, give me this experience. What can you make me feel? And that's kind of what we want, is those stories that really make us feel something. And that makes us sound like we're dead inside. but for real, like
some days I am.
Some of the most striking stories that we've had came out of left field to me. Like I never would have thought that certain scenarios would be scary. And again, I don't mean to be vague, but also I don't want to spoil anyone's story because there's a few that we've picked as like definite yeses that I was like, I did not see that coming. And that made me feel so much. It's the stories that like, I've always been a reader. I've always read books. I read books of all genres, not just horror, but I like it when a story grips me and takes me into its world. So like I used to read in public school to like forget the fact that I was at school, like if a story can grip you and pull you in, especially in a short story, that's when you know that you've written something powerful.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. And if we could fill an entire anthology in every story, like it would be amazing. And this is the eye that we're curating with. It's when the reader finishes and reads every story, we don't want them to be able to pick a favorite because they're all like, they all were different.
Yeah. I like that concept.
Or like when you look back at the titles and you're like, oh yeah, that one. Oh yeah, that one.
Yeah.
And like, that would be so special. And like, that's what we are trying to do. Like we're being we're reading very critically. We're both kind of like bubbly and silly, but like this is very serious and very important to us. Like, like we laugh all the time, but like, this is important to us.
It is really important to us. Yeah. So we've read so many phenomenal stories that have been sent in, but we are looking for those stories that will, I don't want to say unforgettable, but also kind of unforgettable. Like, wow, do you remember that though? Do you remember that story?
Well, it's funny because when we're comparing stories, because we get so many, it's hard to keep track. So I'm like, I was the one with the thing. And you're like, oh yeah. Like there's like that one detail that we can say. And it's like, oh yeah, that was
detail. Like, I forgot that I read that one, but I love that one so much.
Yeah. And sometimes it really, go ahead. You go.
No, I
was going to say it's just the details. Sometimes it's as minute, just finer details as it is, even on an investigation. It could be something that happened in just a split second that resonates, or one EVP that you happen to pick up out of, maybe several, but there was one that just had something that tugged a certain heartstring somehow.
Yeah.
And that's a beautiful story. Those that move you without making you realize that there's been any heavy lifting at all. It's almost this effortless thing. It could be painful, right? It could be painful, but also effortless. Figure that out.
We are reading with a critical eye, and it's not to be critical of the writing. It's just that we really do want this to be something that is, what's the word without sounding dramatic? I was going to say life-changing. I want to change your life.
Let's go with that.
So we are reading through them critically, and it's not to be like picky or anything like that. It's just that when we started this, we wanted to make connections, but we also really wanted to deliver truly good, scary stories. In my mind, it's like I grew up with Are You Afraid of the Dark and Goosebumps and scary stories to tell in the dark.
Oh yeah.
I don't want to feel like we're in elementary school or middle school, but you know how the way that you still remember those stories, like the girl with the green ribbon, that just, everybody knows that. And you're like, oh, that was terrifying. I read that story to my kids like not that long ago. And I was like, why did this have such a chokehold on me as a kid? And it's just because it was a compelling story.
Again, it's that magic. Exactly. Looking back on some of those stories that I read, or just even the books over the years that just have that special quality, that secret sauce that you can't define, but you know it when you're experiencing it, right?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
So instead of ending with the don't turn around question tonight, I am going to ask you instead, tell me one book, one story, or one film that scared the crap out of you.
Okay.
Who wants to start?
I have a film.
Okay.
Because I only just watched. I'll give you a film and a book. And the film actually is Evil Dead Rise. I just watched it.
Oh, it was so good.
It was so good.
It was fun.
It was so good. It was wildly unsettling.
Yes.
And my dog was just making some sounds. It was, there was a couple of parts. It was the cheese grater. That was in the preview, so I feel like I could say that. But the cheese grater scene made me, like, I plugged my ears and closed my eyes. And it's hard to get that kind of reaction from me because I just was like, nope. So that's my film. But the book that really scared me actually is The Shining. The film The Shining, I never really found that scary, but the miniseries scared me a lot when I was growing up. But the book version of The Shining to this day is one of those books that will get me every single time.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah, so, absolutely.
Those are mine.
So I'm trying to
Mallory.
So I'm trying to think, like, I'm kind of coming up with a blank on what a book that scared me because like all the Grady Hendrix were so good and they had terrifying moments. Like at the end of How to Sell a Haunted House, when she goes back to her apartment, I was like, no! You know, like I wasn't scared. I was more pissed off. But there are two movies that apart from Hostel, like I said, I'm a total horror movie wimp, but Pet Sematary, specifically when I forget whose sister is ill and she's in the bed and like they go to...
that's the wife, as Zelda is in the bed.
Yeah, or something.
With spinal meningitis.
Yeah, and like her mouth is like messed up or something.
Yeah.
And and when she and her mouth gets real big when they go to look at her, and like I was with my husband and I was like, I can't. Right over here, I love him, but my idiot brother-in-law was like, you have to watch, because I love The Shining so much. He's like, you have to watch Dr. Sleep. And I'm like, watch it. I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
I'm like, this is good. And then I have an 8-year-old son. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
When that kid, like when they attack that kid, I'm like, turn it off. My husband was like, turn this off. We were both like, forget it. We were watching Predator or like Commando. Like we need
really bad.
I need to cleanse my brain.
Literally anything else. Yeah, those scenes were hard to get through.
Oh
I wasn't expecting that because The Shining has such a different vibe to it.
I know. And I didn't even mind like the start of it. And like up until that point, I was like pretty much okay. But like anything with kids, I can't.
It's tough.
Yeah.
It's tough. Yeah. So for me, book wise, and I'll just end with a book, was Pet Sematary. And I've read it twice. Yeah. The first time it scared the bejesus out of me. And the second time I read it, which was a few years ago, scared me on a whole different level. But hands down, that has got to be one of the most gut-wrenching, like difficult books to read. Like it's a love, hate. It is drags you through the mud, and it's I honestly I never even recommend to anyone to read that book. Like I will leave it off my recommendations because that's how heavy it is.
You like rip your guts out. Yeah, no, that's I completely skittered over the worst part of that movie because my brain was done.
It was misfiring. Okay, now the most important question is, I gotta ask it, do you turn around?
Yes.
Yeah.
Now the real most important question is, where do people find out how to submit their works to this, what is surely going to be a very unique, incredible anthology?
Yay. So it's on both of our Instagrams. We have all the submission guidelines. They're pinned to the top of my profile. I don't know if they're pinned to yours, but anyway.
It should be pinned to mine, but I don't think I have. It's pinned on my
They're all over the place. We'll be totally annoying about them. Everything is due on August 1st. I said midnight. I don't know if that means I'm not going to be like a jerk and be like, no. If it's August 2nd, you're SOL. But like,
dare you?
Yeah, you missed it by a minute. I meant whatever. Submission guidelines are in our Instagram profiles. They're often in our stories. We're going to be reposting them. They're also on my Facebook page. And we do have a Facebook page for Dark Village Publications, which is what we're calling ourselves.
Ooh, I like the sound of that.
Yeah. It's a village of dark people.
Of dark.
Just spooky people.
Yeah. And Yeah, so it's on Facebook and on Instagram, and everything is due August 1st. You can email your submissions between, what is it? I made notes. Between 101 and 6,500 words to darkvillagepub@yahoo.com.
All right. Yep. And that will all be in the show notes, of course. Mallory, Karly, thank you guys so much for hanging out tonight.
Thank
this
you.
has been a delight.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Of course. And that wraps it up, folks. Thanks, as always, for being part of the Don't Turn Around community. Without your ears, this show would not be a thing. So please help us get these stories out to more listeners, of course, by rating, reviewing, and subscribing, and just telling a friend about Don't Turn Around. And we'll see you next time.
We just don't know what really causes this phenomenon. So this has been going on for a very long time, but every time it happens...